So welcome everybody to this webinar by Young Ship Dubai. It's a great pleasure to be being here today to discuss with some amazing expert panelists the case study of the Ever Given, an incident that without doubt has caused a lot of unsettlement in world trade and beyond. We're discussing a very interesting aspect of it today when it comes to salvage operations and how actually the ship got unblocked from the canal and allowed the continuation of operations. And just a few words on Young Ship Dubai. Young Ship Dubai is, of course, a non-profit association. It's part of the Young Ship International Group, which is, I believe, in over 30 countries. And its purpose is youth empowerment and helping the youth of this industry be better trained, network, and giving them opportunities. Joining me in this amazing panel is Stephen Wood, a salvage master, marine consultant, and member of SRL panel of Archimedes Limited. Captain David Sterling, who is a FNI salvage master as well, and managing director of Sterling Salvage Ltd. Mrs. Joanna Vida, who is a partner in Pennington's Manchester Cooper, Captain Zahir Solir Irani, who is a consultant and managing director at Constellation Marine Surveyors, Claire Savlerius, who is the principal at Savlerius Salvage, and Maria Ragumerli, who is the technical superintendent at Helicon Shipping, all of them very well experienced in this sector. And I am Gina Panayotou, the founder and CVO of Oceans Arena and the board advisor to Young Ship Dubai. Feel free to start sharing any questions you may have in the chat box. And without further ado, I will do the rounds of the table so our expert panelists can give us a few pointers on this incident, salvage operations, and how they will be approaching today's discussion from their experiences and thoughts and inputs. So I will start maybe with the ladies of this room. So Maria, would you like to give us your opening statements?
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Gina, for inviting me to join today. As you said, my name is Maria Dragumerli. I am a naval architect and technical superintendent with Helicon Shipping. Previously, I worked as a marine consultant, focusing on marine claims, salvage, and wreck removal operations. So today I will try to bring the perspective of both the owner and the consultant in terms of dealing with marine casualties.
Thank you, Mario. We really look forward to that. Ioanna, the lawyer on the table today, she does have a heavy burden to carry out.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me in that panel, first of all. I'm Ioanna Vita. I am in shipping litigation, mainly part of the business since 1990. I have been dealing with various casualties. I haven't been involved in the particular one, but it is true that the Ever Given has caused a lot of questions and a lot of issues because a lot of claims have already arisen, and there's going to be a lot of claims which will be in the future. And this actually recent grounding is a clear example of the devastating impact an incident involving a single vessel can have on the global supply chain. So I'm going to bring some ideas into the table on that aspect. Thank you.
Indeed. And Claire, would you like to share your thoughts?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting us here today. I'm in SALVAGE group for 20 years or so, so I have experience in salvage, and I'm sure this incidents demonstrate how valuable the salvors are in the trade today. I'm sure marine salvage industry must be supported and encouraged, because they were the professional salvors here in this Ever Given case solved a huge problem, as you already know. So we must support salvors. Thank you.
Definitely, thank you. I think that's why we also started with the video by the Suez Canal authorities, which does set the scene of exactly how interesting this salvage operation was. Captain Irani, now over to you.
Thank you, Gina. Lovely initiative, and you've done good so far. Being a sailing master, and everybody needs eyes and ears. So we, as independent surveyors and consultants, represent the eyes and ears of those who want to know what is going on ground. So we come across as those who actually look at facts, capture it, pick up evidence, and put it as it is to those deep pockets, legal heads, and those underwriters who want to know the truth. And truth as an independent means giving both sides of the coin. And that's exactly what I think. And there are plenty of interests, and every interest has to have their eyes and ears. So there are a lot of us surveyors who are on board, usually representing various parties. Some get a red carpet, and some get shown the gangway. And we will talk on both aspects of it, and that's going to be my role play in today's discussion.
I think this red carpet and gangway comparison is very interesting. We could have a webinar on its own, maybe. Stefan?
Right. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. My name's Stephen Wood. My company, Archimedean, supports salvors and owners responding to marine casualties. By qualification, I'm a naval architect, but through my career, I've worked in most operational roles in marine salvage, as well as being a consultant after that, doing much the same as Captain Zaire, advising and looking through the operation and working out what happened. And this case we have given is fascinating in many aspects, but the bit that is probably almost overshadowed by the last 100 days of negotiations is the fact that the operation was very, very swift and effective. And the actual condition of the Suez Canal are actually rather benign. There's not much current, not much tide, and there's a huge amount of resources available to people. So it was actually a very, very effective operation that has hit the media spotlight.
Indeed, it does seem fascinating for a bystander from my side, so I can't wait to hear your expert input. And David, you have made it with us. I understand you're having a few technical difficulties, but let's see if we can make it to your initial comments.
Yeah, thank you, Gina. Yes, no, we're in a rural location and broadband is a little bit unreliable, so I may drop out again, but I am here now.
So would you, we just did the tables, if you would briefly give us a note on yourself before we go into, of course, the main discussion of why this salvage operation was so interesting.
Yes, my name is David Sterling. I've been involved in the salvage business since 1979. So many years in all sorts of salvage and wreck removal, working my way up from a first trip third mate to master, and then salvage master, and been involved with many of the largest casualties around the world, including the Costa Concordia, the APL Panama, the Rena in New Zealand, ships on fire, container ships on fire, a wide experience of anything maritime. Working over the years for the largest salvage companies, working globally, and in 2007 I decided to start working for myself and set up my own consultancy business. Very much like Stephen, doing working for governments, for underwriters, for ship owners around the world.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David. And now the greatest question of all. So I think we gave the audience an idea of how the salvage of the Ever Given took place, what it involved, and to what an extent. But if you were asked in one sentence within your capacity to state why does the Ever Given grounding provide a great case study for salvage operations, what would you each have to say about that? Maybe I'll shift the table around a little bit and we can start with Captain Irani and make the rounds again.
Yes, so if I understand the question correctly, you want to know from my perspective as an independent surveyor, what would have had been the first right of the way? Well, the first thing, if I would be the owner, I would basically escort the master and tell him to keep it zipped. Vet his questions and only answer questions, or be very careful with media, etc. And I think that was done very effectively. We hardly saw anybody have that pause on the master other than the managers and the legal advisors. Then there would be those who would, that's from the owner's perspective. And then there would be those who chartered the vessel and had a lot of stake in it. And those would be very much interested in knowing what kind of evidence and how soon she will be out, because there would be enough cargo interest on their backs to know when she would be out and about. And I think 6 days, as Stephen mentioned, with all the resources and the water being as calm as we could expect in a lake, I think it was an extremely efficient operation, and we have to take this as a case study. It was not a small vessel, and there were a lot of odds and a lot of evidence that could have been spilled out, a lot of statements that could have been flown irresponsibly. But I think the media management, etc., from the owner's perspective, was pretty well managed to an extent. And then, of course, there are those storytellers who will always try to become experts overnight and go on social media, and that cannot be helped these days. But that's my input to your question, Gina. Is that good enough?
Yes, of course. Excellent. Thank you. Claire, over to you.
Yes, I think the Ever Given, the location in which she was grounded, disrupted the world trade, which costed the Suez Canal 12 to 15 million per day, something like that, I read. I'm pretty sure they were also involved and blamed for the accident because there was a pilot on board. And but the ship took all the blame, and the Suez Canal authorities, although probably responsible for the grounding, since they had the pilot on board, they however demanded initially a compensation of 900 million, and they went for 3 months into negotiations until the vessel was released, which I think it's a bit odd to wait 3 months for the vessel to be released, the cargo to be released, and all the blame on the ship, which is not fair, I think.
That is unfortunate. Yeah. I'm sure the panel can confirm this, but is usually the case. The ship is always to blame, of course, but indeed that is a very valid point.
Yeah, usually underwriters place security or a guarantee, and the vessel is released immediately after the salvage operation successfully completes. Now, why they stayed there for 3 months, I really don't know.
It is quite an interesting case study on many aspects, from PR to a lot of other issues, which I would like not to elaborate on at the current stage.
Okay. Okay.
Stefan?
Very interesting. I mean, the sheer scale of a container ship of this size, when you approach something like that, it's almost bewildering. I mean, it's the length, the breadth, the height of it, and you're looking at it, trying to work out what to do. And of course, we had all these media shots of it, and the media shots of the little excavator sitting underneath the bow. I mean, just shows the sheer scale of the problem and the resources required to deal with it. I mean, also in the media is the facts of it, facts behind it. I mean, the grounding was at 12 knots. It wasn't a little contact, and so the energy involved in the grounding was absolutely vast. The ground reaction was probably in the order of 50 to 100,000 tons. I mean, it was a huge ground reaction, and something massive had to be done to deal with it. As Claire was saying, I mean, the economic impact of it, not just in terms of the Suez Canal Authority, but also for the ship owners and all the other vessels that are having to make decisions around this. But ultimately, it went well. We're saying the interesting thing about the security. I imagine from involvement as a consultant, I expect that the level of the security they wanted was going to be so much higher than they wanted to settle, but they weren't prepared to put it in because that makes it a little bit harder to work back from. But I'm sure other people can say other things about that. Ultimately, it went well, though.
Thankfully, it did. Joanna?
Well, having heard Claire and Stephen, I would more likely respond by making a statement at the same time. Well, the Ever Given is a 400 length vessel. It's a huge vessel which carried about 20,000 containers on board. What is interesting is that after 6 days of blockage of the canal, no cargo was lost, no pollution was occurred, 25 persons of the crew were safe, and the vessel was only slightly damaged. However, this incident, which it's always, unfortunately, the vessel's blame, even though that the pilots were employed by the Suez Canal Authority, because since 1956, which became part of Egypt, it's always at every port, whatever the position on the pilots is, and whether they are at fault or not, is usually that the pilots are just giving instructions to the master, and the ultimatum responsibility lies on the owner, on the captain of the vessel. So basically, it couldn't be any other position that it is the master who is at fault and not the pilots in this particular event. So it's interesting to note that the claim, which was submitted as on the first basis, was about $916 million, which part of it was like 272,000 were in respect of expenses and costs. 300 million were $300 million were on salvage bonuses, and $344 million were in respect of losses in damages, even loss of reputation, and even moral losses. So as everybody can understand, these were just claims which were not really sustainable. And if these were ever accepted in the market, then it would collapse the insurance worldwide. So from a legal point of view, this matter raises a number of questions concerning the assessment of the damage, the release of the security, and the recoverability of the losses incurred, but not only those who are involved in the incident itself, but also to other entities extending well beyond the maritime sector, taking into account the delay of all the goods. They created a lot of domino claims down the line. So just a small response and maybe statement.
No, thank you very much. Indeed, the amount, was definitely exaggerated. We could tell from day one, and it's quite interesting also how what Claire mentioned, that it took so long for the real figures to start showing and the vessel to be released. David, would you like to also share your input on why this is such a great case study and the factors there involved when it comes to salvage operations?
Yeah, I certainly share Stephen's view that on many levels it's a fascinating case from a seamanship point of view, from a salvor's point of view, from the container chartering, the Suez Canal authorities' liabilities, and all sorts of various issues that have never been raised before sort of come to the light in this case. I mean, as Stephen said, speed is one of the issues. Not only speed in causing the incident in the first place, causing loss of directional control, but the speed of the impact with the canal bank as well. The faster a ship goes, the greater momentum or energy that it contains, and if you double the speed, you could ripple the energy. So traveling at 12 knots instead of 8 knots means there's a huge amount of momentum, and once something goes wrong, it's very difficult to stop. On the issue of speed, of course, every master gets trained as he proceeds through the system about the narrow channels and the effect of going too fast, and to a certain extent, the master should have known better. But similarly, the Suez Canal pilot is also an experienced pilot and should have known better as well. So it's very easy to say it's all the master's fault. To a certain extent, there's a shared responsibility for the incident, but it's very difficult to blame the Canal Authority for that because, as Johanna said, they've pretty much written the rules of navigation, so they can't be blamed for anything. So yes, it's Suez Canal Authority make the rules, but they also break the rules, and they don't seem to take any responsibility for that. So I think there'll be a lot of thought as to how to deal with these situations in the future. Underwriters, P&I clubs, ship owners will all be scratching their heads to come up with some other solution for the next incident that might happen. So.
Yeah, after all, we are a reactive industry, but it shall be quite interesting how this will evolve on this level. And Maria?
For me, I would say that the moment I heard about the Ever Given, it made me question my career change, and I was phoning up my colleagues to see if they received an instruction and who was getting involved. I think most of it has already been covered, but what I would like to add is that from another perspective that I am now actually experiencing, as 3 of our ships joined the queue behind the Ever Given outside the Suez Canal, it became quite a big concern where they're actually deviating and going through the Cape of Good Hope and taking the vessel from, let's say, a ship that is destined to go to Singapore, suddenly having to go all around Africa to reach there. That would be from a 22-day, maybe a 53-day voyage. So obviously the financial implications for the entire shipping world suddenly was, I think it was a big realization of how important the Suez Canal is. And the fact that there's some parts of it that there's no bypass made us all realize how actually fragile shipping trade can be. So I think I will leave it at that and not take up more time so we can
And actually, probably on the little bit more positive side, it did bring shipping again to the forefront and spotlight of the media, which could have been used a bit more positively. But yeah, publicity is always good, I guess, either way. The next question for maybe those in the audience and maybe even me who do not have a more technical understanding of how the salvage operation works, it really would be great if you could each, from within your role and scope, explain more of the practicalities. So who would be responsible for what, essentially, and then also maybe touch upon the contributing factors when assessing the salvage claim. I know Joanna already made a brief intro, but it would be great to hear from all what would be these factors in assessing the claim by the authorities, what triggers the right, and etc. So maybe I'll start with David now, and we can make the rounds once again.
Okay, well, usually when a vessel runs aground or requires salvage assistance, it's under the control of the ship owners and the ship managers, and they arrange for salvors to be appointed. It's a little bit different in this situation because we're within the terra firma of a country who have a very intense interest in the operation of the canal. But generally, the ship owners are in charge, and they're guided by their hull and machinery underwriters. And in cases such as this, where there's a large value for the ship and the cargo, and there's a large fund, it proceeds down hull and machinery cargo underwriters route. In situations where there's very little salved value, it then becomes the liability of the P&I underwriters, the third-party liabilities, and they take control over the damage claims and any pollution or wreck removal and so on. But this case is particularly interesting because it's such a huge claim, and the largest single part of the salvage claim is going to be paid by the P&I underwriters for the losses and for the compensation claims to the Suez Canal Authority. And they virtually have no say in the whole process of how the operation is going to be run. So I can imagine there's a great deal of frustration on the part of the UK club, having faced a bill for many hundreds of millions of dollars and not having any control over it. And that's something that I think may need to be developed in future operations. I remember when I first joined Titan many years ago, there was discussions in these days with some salvors and some P&I underwriters about a concept which they called the Global Response Network, and they wanted the P&I clubs to fund salvage equipment in strategic locations, and it was available for immediate use for the P&I clubs. But the P&I clubs didn't want to do that because they saw casualties like this being a salvage situation, and they didn't want to pay for salvage services when there were other underwriters to do that. But I think following the payment to the SEA, they may have changed their opinion a little bit, and may want to look at what they can do in particular choke points like the Suez Canal or the Panama Canal in case of a major incident, and have certain predetermined equipment standing by, which in the big picture would not cost very much, but potentially could save hundreds of millions of dollars in claims in the long run. So that's perhaps one of the things that's going to come out of the Ever Given incident.
Definitely. Thank you very much. Captain Irani, would you like to go next? I believe you're muted, and would really like to hear what you have to say.
Yes, sure, definitely. Forgot to press the button. I think speed of response is key in such incidences, and also resource management. Communications play a key role, and I believe from what little I know, there was a bit of contention between the authorities who wanted to use their own tugs versus them taking advice from professional salvers. And I believe the first 2 days were lost in this, and it's not the first time, let me tell you. I mean, look, signing LOFs and then negotiating while the tug arrives on site, or the professional divers arrive on site, etc. So this is a normal thing, but in this case there was this state-owned pride which the authorities wanted to bask for themselves and say that their own tugs pulled it out and this, that, and the other, whereas they had to use a dredger and all sorts of extra help with professional salvage companies on one hand, giving the expert views, which should have been thought of from the first day itself. And we could have probably saved a lot of time. Perhaps on the hindsight, we can say that, but we all know in honesty that the super tide played a substantial role, and fortunately man and material was standing by to make that pull effective. Saying that from a surveyor's perspective, I think from what I know, and is usually the case, evidence was very well secured. I think the ship managers were very quickly on board, salvaging, assisting, and safeguarding the master. In fact, so much so that I believe even 2 crew members were signed off on humanitarian grounds because the families were affected by COVID. So all in all, there were a lot of bright sparks in this entire operation from that perspective. Being a master and having seen enough of these situations that masters and chief engineers get involved in, I can assure you that this master and his crew would have been an extremely, extremely difficult situation and a lot of anxiousness. I am glad that in spite of it taking 3 months, it did get resolved. And I was told reliably by people I know from the club and from the Seafarers Mission and from the managers' offices that the crew and officers on board were taken care of as much as they could have under the circumstances, which I believe is very important, because I've seen masters with 20-30 years at sea weeping on my shoulder and in complete disarray when there is as much as a small incident of an injury on board or a little pollution ashore. So being somebody who is a first respondent in large casualty salvages, including big fires and disasters, I must say that the first 24 hours are so crucial to manage sentiments and communicating absolutely actively from our perspective as being surveyors on ground. And that is key, and that sets the platform for a lot of decisions to be made by either the charterers, the legal authorities, and coming up with as much evidence and truthful evidence and not perceptions of what we see is key, and that would sum up the role of an independent and truly an independent who comes on board first during these incidences.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Captain Irani. Maria, would you like to also share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, of course. Actually, one thing, taking it a step back from what we've already had, I would like to say that normally in an incident when it happens, you would have the crew trying to refloat the vessel themselves before the event actually gets reported to the owners. Then once owners get involved, they would try to make another refloating attempt before they would actually take it a step further and inform the insurance, the authorities, and usually the last one to be called are the salvos, who using their own means, maybe they already know about the situation and they would gather around. And then indeed, as Captain Mirani said, there can be huge delays in finally appointing salvos and accepting that actually the situation is not as easy as initially the crew might have thought, maybe the owners, and trying to make their own refloating attempts. Obviously, the Ever Given was different, given that the pilot was on board and the authorities were the first ones to find out. And we have seen that once authorities do get involved, they like to take control of the situation and choose the salvos, choose the method, and be quite active in the whole process. Generally, it is very important, in my view, to get professional assistance as quickly as possible. It's good to educate the masters and the crew. Then sometimes there's only so much they can do, and sometimes they might end up causing more harm than actually helping the situation if they keep on, say, trying to reflow in full speed astern, full speed ahead. Then they might end up actually digging a deeper trench for the vessel and running it further aground. So it's all these things that need to be taken into consideration at the very beginning, and be able to accept that maybe a good solution is to get a professional assessment quite early on.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Maria, for that. Ioanna?
Well, as we all say, this is an extraordinary casualty, which did not create, thanks God, no loss of life or pollution or real big damages to the vessel itself, but it created a big disorder in the market. However, even though the canal authorities, they claim that they did everything in order, and no one accepted any accusations regarding possible insufficient dredging or deficient maintenance or inadequate management of the situation as at the beginning. And the blame goes all to the vessel. It seems that at the end of the day, the canal authorities, they have actually increased the income during the last year by 2% from the same period of last year. So they have increased to $5.84 billion as an income this year. And that came 3-4 days after the release of the vessel from the canal authorities, after this agreement, which we don't know the details of it, but it was an agreement in the region of $550 million. And that was because of this limitation of liability application the owners took. But that's something we'll talk about that later. At this stage, what I can say is that there will be significant salvage rewards in respect of what the future brings. And general average has been declared, and average adjusters involved, I think it's Richard Hogg, have been appointed to collect the form of guarantees from cargo owners and underwriters. The general average will be adjusted in accordance with 1994 York Antwerp rules, based on the bills of lading adjacent clause, I suppose, which is all governed under English law. and the salvage reward will be based, I suppose, on the criteria of Article 13 of the Salvage Convention, which is the applicable law on the salvage reward, and taking into consideration that it is $115 million worth of value vessel, about $500 million of cargo, the salvage reward in that case will be huge. Of course, we don't know in practice how the salvage award will be assessed, because it is very speculative what would happen if the salvage was not successful. So at this stage, even though that has caused a big disruption in the whole market, at the end of the day, maybe the people who are really responsible for the casualty, they seem to be the winners of the case, in my view. So that's for me at this point.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Joanna, for that. And Stefan and Claire?
I think most aspects have been covered by previous panelists, but I just wanted to add that the Suez Canal Authority regulation regarding salvage within the canal zone is reserved for the Suez Canal Authority. So I think pretty much they do whatever they like. In this case, I guess due to the lack of expertise, they permitted foreign salvors to assist, because in many cases they do the whole operation themselves. In this case, they used professional foreign salvors from ISU members. I think it was Smith and Nippon to refloat the Ever Given. And due to their expertise and equipment and people, they undertook the whole job and was successfully completed. They had dredging, land-based excavations, powerful tugs, many people around, and they freed the giant container, which was heavily laden in Straden in confined space. I am sure the high tide always is helpful, but you have to be able to take advantage of it. And regarding the salvage award, I'm not sure if there was a contract between the owners and the authorities. The fund is huge. The vessel and the cargo is huge, the fund itself. But if there's no contract, like an LOF, we usually use the LOF, and then an arbitrator will award the compensation for the salvage. In this case, the salvage, the authorities can demand whatever they wish, independent of what the cost is. So we'll see finally the outcome.
Actually, Claire, you answered one of the questions that came in on the salvage contract already, so that's quite an interesting aspect of it. And of course, I'll ask Joanna towards the end of when we're taking questions on her take on that. So thank you. And Stefan?
A little more to add, that one of the reasons that state authorities often get involved is to bypass the time lag of owners dealing with salvage companies, negotiating contracts and things like that. But here there's various reasons for it. Not only the fact that they have the resources to deal with it anyway and continually reinvest in that. One of the other roles that the salvors would have been there to do, and alongside the consultants that would have been appointed, they would have been monitoring the operation of the Suez Canal Authority to see if it's reasonable, and coming up with suggestions for other ways of doing it, making sure that it's right, and trying to work out how much it would have cost. And so there would have been that thought of working out how much it's all going to cost, how much we're going to settle for, starting from very early on in the project.
Definitely. Thank you very much for that, Stefan. I'm going to go and touch a little bit upon what Claire mentioned about the high tide, because it has been a very interesting aspect of it. And somewhere I think I also read that it wasn't for this lucky high tide, the vessel wouldn't have been refloated. And I would like your take from a more technical aspect for those panelists who have that expertise on whether there was a risk of immobilization and if this high tide was really the most significant contributor to refloating on the vessel. And then as we're approaching towards the last few minutes, I also want from the legal expertise and whoever else wishes to contribute on the limitation fund, which we already mentioned. But let's do the high tide first. Claire, is there anything else you would like to add before I go on to our masters, of course?
I think high tide is always helpful, but it's a combination of operations that help the vessel refloat. It's not only the high tide. Maybe they need lightening, maybe they needed dredging or other methods. It's not only the high tide. That's my view.
Thank you, Claire. And Captain Irani, was there a risk of immobilization indeed? Was it the lucky high tide that...
Every bit helps, Claire, Gina, every bit helps, but it has its limitations. I would say high tide without having the understanding of where the contact points were, what kind of forces would have been required to pull from what direction, if all that was not pre-calculated, and then the two most powerful tugs which arrived timely, that was critical as well. You know, it is nice to have the advantage, but if you're not prepared to make the most of it, then you miss the window, and then you'd wait for what, I think another 14 days there would be another chance like this of another high tide. But I am very, very complimentary of the amount of work that went in. In fact, the night before, the Suez Canal Authority spokesperson came on their local media and actually mentioned it, that tomorrow morning, hopefully, the canal will be out and operational. That was the level of preparation and confidence that they had. Don't ask me what they were doing the previous 5 days, because that could have been also equally possible if they had the right expertise from earlier on. But I think it has a role to play. But saying that, she was fully laden, and there is this tendency of a fully laden vessel, whether container or not, to have sagged. You know, it sags as the cargo, and that affects the structural integrity. It makes the grounding that much more rigid. So all that had to be considered, and calculations had to be right, spot on, to be able to take advantage and start pulling at the right time, so that they have adequate time to pivot the vessel through, and which they did. So that's my input to this on ground. But I think there are experienced salvage masters here who actually control this whole event, would, I'm sure, add a little bit more on ground realities.
Thank you, Captain Irani. David, would you like to share your thoughts on this next?
Yes, obviously the high tide was critical. I wouldn't say lucky, that's being a little bit ungenerous, but no, in the Suez Canal, the difference between the spring tides, which is the highest tides, and the neap tides, which are the lowest in the cycle, is only about 30 centimeters. So it's not a huge benefit from one, from 1 week to the next. The time distance between high tide springs and high tide neaps is probably 7 days. But for a vessel the size of the Ever Given, 400 meters long, nearly 60 meters wide, and Stephen and Maria, who are naval architects more than I am, will correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that for every centimetre increase in tide, the ground reaction would reduce by about 600 to 700 tons. So conversely, if you miss the high tide and the tides are dropping by 4 centimetres, 5 centimetres every day, your ground reaction is getting 2,000, 3,000 tons, perhaps more every day. And if you miss the high tide on springs, you can't take cargo off fast enough to compensate for the extra ground reaction. And from that point of view, it was critical to have the high tide when they did, because if they'd missed that high tide, it would have been perhaps 14 days later before there was a chance to refloat, because the possibility of taking fuel off was limited. The possibility of taking containers off was virtually impossible in the situation she was in without taking several months. The other thing with vessels aground is, you have to overcome friction usually, and usually a ship's aground at one end or the other, and you can connect your tugs up and get access to the end that's in deep water and start working it back and forwards and reducing friction and get the vessel into deep water. But in this case, there was no access for the tugs to get a good angle to pull, and she was pinned at both sides, so there was no opportunity to start getting some dynamics involved. So I think they were stuck between a rock and a hard place, which is a very appropriate metaphor. And really, the high tide made all the difference. Jumping back to some of what the other panelists said is, the very first thing that the salvors need to do is to gather information. There's no point rushing into a situation without knowing what the ground reaction is, where the grounding points are, if there's damage, and is there hogging and sagging at different stages of the tide. So the first element of any successful salvage plan is to gather information, to get divers down, to do soundings around the ship, to find out what the nature of the bottom is. Is the bottom sandy? Is it stony? What's the friction? And there needs to be a sort of semi-scientific analysis based on as much information as you can gather. And of course, it's not always possible to get all the information, but information gathering is an essential part of the plan. And calculating what the tides would be at that particular location would be a part of that.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the thorough explanation of the process. Maria, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think I will agree with the previous panelist saying that it's always a combination of methods. It's, I think, very rarely that we see only one method being used in a salvage operation. You will have to identify the window, and then you will have to actually prepare everything to be sure that you will be able to make the most of that opportunity. It's very often that with the salvos and the consultant, we will calculate a best case scenario and a worst case scenario, and you will present that to the clients, the people, and sometimes we see that if the best case scenario comes up, which is that the ground reaction is not as high because maybe the data gathered was not so accurate, or the tide ended up being a little bit higher than expected, or the wind was favorable, or any other content that was not taken into account and actually brings you closer to your best case scenario. We see sometimes then people are a little bit disappointed, and they think that, oh, maybe it wasn't all of your efforts that actually brought us to this result. So I don't think it was only the lucky tide. I completely agree that there was a lot of hard work that was put in place, and it needs to be recognized. Yeah, I will leave it at that.
Of course. Thank you very much, Maria. And Stefan?
Yeah, the luck aspect, I don't think the tide was necessarily lucky unless there was something like atmospheric or weather conditions that caused the tide to be higher than tabulated. because otherwise it's just the usual tide cycle. Yes, there could have been a delay of a couple of weeks waiting for the next cycle, but it was a known factor. Where I think the luck was is not hitting something that was hard. If they'd hit a rock, damaged the bow, that could have been a totally different operation. If there had been structural problems, that would have changed the operation drastically. Another area of luck is it happened in Suez, where there's a big dredger. I mean, that dredger is one of the biggest dredgers in the world and capable of excavating huge amounts of sand. And having that available meant that the operation could be progressed very fast. And I would actually think that the rate of excavation from that dredger would actually be more important than the tide, because even if they missed it by a couple of days, they could put the dredger back in and just keep on digging.
It's so fascinating also for me to have this greater understanding. That's why I really wanted to analyze this part, because I saw a few titles on it was a lucky high tide, and I was thinking that can't just be it. Ioana, I would like to, hand over to you now for the legalities of the limitation fund, because that's obviously one of the other major issues that was making headlines, as we saw the owners very quickly establish this limitation fund of 114 million, if I'm not mistaken. And maybe a few thoughts on how this affected the process and the impact of Egypt, of course, not being a signatory to the LMC. And
yes.
Then maybe also some thoughts, feel free for others in the panel to join in on whether abandonment would have been an option in this case. So go ahead, we look forward to hearing.
Yes, first of all, if you don't mind, I'd like to share my experience because I have worked in owners' offices a few years ago. In fact, it was Tsavliris SalvageEvent who assisted in refloating a vessel in Badar Imam Khomeini. That was in 1997. The vessel grounded on the 6th of December. I remember the dates because it was just Christmas time and New Year's Eve, and it was just a terrible experience. But I remember that everything was done with an effort to catch up with the tide. So those days, I'm not a technical person. I just realized how important it is to work quickly, efficiently, and catch up with the weather. So I guess the tide is something that people know beforehand, and they just try to be assisted by the tide. So that's all. And it was a good experience though. I learned a lot through this successful operation by the SalvageEvent those days. Anyway, so actually what happened in that case is that under the London Convention on Limitation of Liability for Maritime Claims, LLMC 1976, which is amended in 1996, ship owners are entitled to limit their liability to the vessel's value plus any earned freight. So in that case, in this occasion, both UK and Egypt are parties to this 1976 limitation of liability for maritime claims convention. And in that respect, owners decided to apply and get this limitation of liability fund in London. Why in London? The reason I think is because if they did the same action in Egypt, they would only limit up to 50 million. So one would ask, why not in Egypt and thus in London? I guess the reason is that because the owners, they wanted to be protected under English law, and because many countries are parties to this limitation of liability convention. And because all the contracts, as you know, the bill of lading, the charter party, everything is under English law, so they opted to get that order from the English courts. So since Egypt is a party to that, the canal authorities are legally obliged to respect the English High Court limitation. However, there's no concursus, as we say, meaning that the parties are free to choose where they can sue, provided such courts and tribunals have jurisdiction. And successful claims against owners will be paid out of this particular fund on pro rata basis. So this particular fund, in this particular case, the limitation amount was $114 million, and it's based on the size of the vessel, as far as I understand. And the vessel, even though the vessel was worth over 100 million and the cargo was worth about 500 million. This fund covers claims for delay in carriage of goods by sea, but they do not cover claims for salvage and general average. That means that all claims for salvage and general average will be paid separately. That means that there will be collection of securities in respect of both salvage and general average contribution. And as I said, the applicable law is the 1989 Salvage Convention. And as the vessel declared general average, the logical thing is that everything will be paid by the contributing parties. A further interesting issue to consider is whether the sums paid to settle the claims will be considered as salvage, because part of it is, it's in case where recovery pro rata to values will be sought from the cargo is GA. Hull underwriters will obviously pay the proportion from owners, but there are also issues like the canal dues, loss of revenue. In that case, the bill will go to the P&I club, as I think Captain Irani said. I don't remember, sorry, somebody said that beforehand in any event. So this will not be part of the GA. So from a legal point of view, the case, even though it is settled between the canal authorities and the vessel itself, I think it gives a lot of way ahead on the different claims on what is going to happen in the future, and whether the vessels, the other vessels which have been delayed, like the time charter vessels or even the voyage charter vessels, they had the claims against this particular vessel and the delay against the particular vessel or the canal authorities, what will happen, and whether recovery is allowed for pure economic loss. I think the answer is that under the UK rule, there's no recovery for pure economic loss, because no duty of care is owed and such losses are too remote for recovery. So I see that it's going to be a long way for future claims, but it all depends on where and who wants to claim for what. It's something very vague at this moment, and it's very speculative to say what is going to happen. What I would like to say is that following that specific event, which created a number of claims on from different sides and on different fronts, I think other canals like Panama Canal is looking to review their safety position as well, the security position as well. And I understand that also the canal authorities, the admiral which is in charge of the Panama Canal said that they will invest in safety and salvage infrastructure for the future. So that's in a nutshell the legal position so far. And it is unfortunate news for the people who would like to claim for all these delays, because the vessel cannot be off hire just waiting where there's an external impediment, but the vessel itself is efficient. So bad news, I'm afraid.
From that perspective, yes, thank you very much, Joanna, for clarifying that point. I think you gave us a very good understanding of the legalities, and I don't know if anybody else from the panel would like to add on the legal aspect. Feel free to do so before we go into the final. Yes, of course.
Just a short note on the limitation and the abandonment. I think the owners correctly established limitation fund, as it consists of the upper total limit of ship's liability. Cargo is not liable for the occurrence per se, but is obliged to contribute in GA to the refloating costs, etc. And the Suez Canal detained the ship and cargo, probably unlawfully. Therefore, abandonment is not an option due to the immensely high values of ship and cargo. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Claire, for that addition. Unless anybody else, does anybody else have something to add before we go into our concluding remarks? I see no volunteers. Joanna, you're fully covered the legal, and thanks, Claire, for that input. So just to remind everybody, of course, you can share any questions on the wall. We'll be taking them very shortly. As we're approaching, we've already run over time, but I would like some final statements on maybe a more speculative scenario of what would have happened, or what would have happened differently if the vessel was indeed immobilized for several weeks, or even abandoned. I don't know, you can each take your take according to experiences. Would be great to hear a brief concluding statement before we take a couple of audience questions. Captain Irani, I see you smiling, so you can go first. A few things came to mind, huh?
I thought a very wicked one, Gina, so I just wanted to share that. I think the two pilots who were on board would have probably lost their jobs, not to mention that the master would have gone insane by then, answering all sorts of questions and dealing with all sorts of combinations to pull her out. These are all thoroughly professional people who spend years and years at sea. But sometimes the resources, the elements, the confusion on ground, when such high-profile incidents happen, overwhelm you. You know, they get the better of you. And I don't know if you all have been following. I've written a few papers and been quite vocal on my socials about the mental fitness and the concerns I've had of the master officers, crew, including the pilot, being criminalized because people would have definitely used the bullet to go through them to reach the target. And unfortunately, that always happens. But this time I wanted to take this opportunity of this incident to start early. And I'm glad that there were efforts of humanitarian considerations, sign-offs. There was enough protection for the master, assurances. Their families were regularly kept updated of what was happening. So, and they were very much within mobile connectivity, which is a rare one because, you know, normally these things happen in the remotes of places in the middle of seas where there are hardly any instances. So on the hindsight, I think I would have thought if this would have prolonged longer, that would have happened from the human side of things. I leave the economic side to be talked by the legal heads amongst us. But I'm so happy that it finished as early as it did. I think it could have, the negotiations, if people weren't expecting too many millions out of this, it could have had finished much earlier if the claims were realistic. But it went on into arrests and things that I think should have been avoided on the hindsight. That's my input into this.
Thank you, Captain Irani. David, would you like to go next?
Yes, thanks, Gina. No, it's an interesting question. Again, I mean, in this case, everything went very quickly and smoothly, and there was only a delay of 6 days. But I have to say, for most salvage and wreck removal operations, that's a really quick timescale to have concluded the operation in, and some salvage operations could take 3 months. As I think Stephen said, the luck was that the vessel wasn't damaged, and if she'd run aground at that speed and flooded the cargo hold, for example, or the dredger, which was a cutter suction dredger, had got too close and punctured a tank or a fuel tank, you know, the vessel potentially could have been there for several months, and what would have happened then is hard to imagine. When the salvors would have just kept working away as they discovered more, they would amend their plan and would have found solutions to whatever obstruction was thrown in their way, because that's the way salvage works. They're problem solvers, and it's just a question of time and money. Nothing is impossible. It's you know, it would have been removed whether it was 6 days, 6 weeks, or 3 months. The vessel wasn't going to stay there, but it's a problem for the Suez Canal Authority and ship owners and charterers. What would have happened had the canal been shut for a longer time? And you know, ultimately they would have had to reroute and gone around Cape of Good Hope. That's the only other option. There's no land linked between the north and the south. They can't unload their containers and have them shipped by road to the Mediterranean and vice versa. The logistics of that is enormous. So I mean, you know, it's something that needs to be considered, because one day it's very likely that will happen, and it has happened in the past. The canal has been shut through to hostile actions in previous years, and it's just an inconvenience for shippers. It's an additional cost for the people who are bringing their color televisions from Japan, and it costs a few more dollars to route it around the Cape of Good Hope, and it's a hindrance to global trade, and it's an increased cost all around. But you know, as I said, it's time and money. That's all it takes.
Yeah, and I think we also saw some of the companies already contemplating taking that route and initiating processes. It was quite interesting, but thankfully the vessel was refloated soon enough. Stefan, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think David's covered pretty much most of it. What would have probably happened at some point, though, is that had it been that they thought that they couldn't move it, they might have reassigned the dredger to enlarging the channel and actually creating a bypass around the vessel itself, and leave the salvors to get on with it. Another thing, had there been structural damage, is there could have been options involving cutting the vessel in two and being able to move one half. There are all kinds of things that you can look at to get out of these problems, but as we always come back to, it's time. And time is what everyone's focused on, particularly with the sort of losses building up that quickly.
True, very valid point. Thank you very much, Stefan. And if we go to Claire now.
Yes, the Ever Given case was a rare accident that has highlighted how much the world's economy relies on shipping and the salvage industry. Professional salvors came to rescue of this massive container ship and performed the first-class service. Casualties which may occur, will occur anywhere, and may cause and may become a multi-million-dollar problem. In this case, we saw unrealistic claims, we saw prolonged negotiations during the first hours, which are very critical, and upon completion of the job, where the Suez Canal finished the negotiations after three months to release the vessel. If the salvors hadn't finished their job in 6 days and several weeks continued, the loss would have been huge, and any perishable cargo would have been lost, and the loss and the loss of use of the canal would have been enormous, although there comes a saturation point. Anyway, it was a very interesting case and very nice to hear everyone's views. Thank you very much.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Claire, Ioanna, and then we go on to Maria for your final comments, remarks.
Well, I think that I agree with Claire on the point that incidents like that, first of all, the commerce is basically relied on shipping, as the majority of the goods are transported by boat, by vessels. So this incident, even though it was only for 6 days of blockage, has created a big disruption in the market. There's going to be a big increase in the goods. There are lots of delays in delivering of the goods. And it just makes you realize that one incident can create the world to go upside down. So it's important to have the professionals on board when things like that happen and get prepared in advance and try to do whatever is to take all precautionary measures in order to be able to meet with the danger when it comes into light. Thank you very much for being invited in that panel. Thank you.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Ioanna. And Maria, your final comments before we start taking a few audience questions.
Thank you, Gina. I think pretty much everything has been covered. I will add up just 2 things. One thing about the delay signing the contract, I will have to say that when the salvos arrive waving an LOF in front of the master, this is actually a very scary moment. And because of the nature of this contract and the exposure, the financial exposure that the owners and the P&I will eventually have, especially with the salvage value being so high. But I will leave this for another webinar because it's a very long topic for discussion. And the second thing I would say, following up on what Captain Irani was saying about the pilots on board, is that generally there is this perception that once the pilot is on board, he essentially takes over the vessel. Which is not true, and Ioanna also commented on that in the beginning. He's there to give guidance, and it's very important that actually we train and we inform the masters, we empower them that they can always challenge. They know the ship better than anyone else, and it's very important that they feel that they can challenge the pilot. And I know some of the captains actually, they do like to be the ones in control and have the pilot next to them to actually give advice, but it really depends on the characters on board at each particular time. So yes, I would like to close with that point, that it's very important to actually train and empower the crew and tell them that is that they can challenge the information that they're being given if they think that something, you know, maybe sometimes the most obvious thing has not been noticed or considered.
Indeed, I'm so happy that you actually close with that statement on the crew, because at the end of the day, they are the most vital asset on that vessel. And with this crisis and the unfortunate way they're being treated, it's just that we need to mention them and pay tribute as much as we can. Thank you very much, Maria, for that. So yes, Captain Irani, of course.
I just want to add a little bit what Maria said. She's absolutely correct. The masters always got the authority. But I can tell you something. No master, unless he's done a Suez Canal simulator course, has got the competence to take over a vessel while navigating through that channel.
Wow.
No master will ever take that response. He has to take the responsibility if there's something very obviously wrong, but he is just not competent to take over and transit a canal with a vessel that size. He has to rely on a pilot for local knowledge, competence, training, and authority, who knows those waters, those bends and turns and curves. So although on paper and legally the master is always in control of any harbor maneuver, any canal maneuver, there is no navigation school that trains a master unless other than a small ship handling course and the basic principles. A seagoing master with foreign-going unlimited credentials is not officially trained to transit a vessel of that size through a canal that long, which takes 8-9 hours before it hits a anchorage spot. Yes, he has the option of pulling out and anchoring if he's not happy before the transit, but once he's in the canal, he's at it. Just to let you know, it's a double-edged sword, and probably the handle is sharp as well for the master.
At that point, I'd like to mention that it's only Panama Canal and Montenegro are the only places where actually the pilots have the full responsibility if something goes wrong, if it is due to their fault, any incident. Any other place in the world is usually the master, but just Panama Canal and Montenegro.
Exactly. Thank you so much, both Captain Irani and Joanna, for the input. I think this final remarks say a lot about where, of course, our aim today wasn't to blame or assess it from that aspect, but definitely I think that says a lot. So we've already run quite over time because this was such an interesting discussion, but I think I will hold you to it, Maria, on putting together a second panel on this topic. We do have a few questions that come in. If we can quickly take maybe a couple, I will just throw them into the panel, and whoever feels that they can chip in, please feel free to do so. So one of them is quite, I would say, speculative, but maybe some thoughts would be good. People would like to know the estimated cost of a salvage operation and how much compensation the owners gave. I'm guessing the second part especially would be tricky to assess, but maybe an estimated cost of generally salvage operations in this situation would be useful. Who wants to volunteer and go first? I see Captain Running smiling again. He's unmuted, our volunteer of the day.
Why are people wanting to know this? Why? I mean, it's none of their business. I just want to know why people want to know this, because there'll be so many figures thrown up in the air, and it's none of their business. It's just a wow factor. It's just a number to talk about or a pint of beer, but I don't think it's anybody's business. And I'm so glad towards the end, the media was kept quite at par with what happened on that negotiation table. And it happened on behind closed doors. And that's all I know about it. But I'm pretty inquisitive. I definitely look up the profiles of people who actually ask this question and want to know what the backgrounds are. And I've been keeping a log of these inquisitive characters. With all due respect to the person asking this question, but I definitely want to know this answer from him or her.
I think maybe people were getting very curious with this aspect because the figures were so huge and making headlines. So everybody really wants to get an understanding, trying to, play devil's advocate here. But yeah, anybody else that would like to share something on this before we take also the next and probably final comment question that came through?
I'll say a few words, but I mean, you can't really come up with much. I mean, in terms of the salvage operation, you'd be trying to work out the cost of all the assets that are involved. I mean, 15 tugs, 2 dredgers, number of excavators, 600 people, and you're trying to add that up as a cost. I mean, for us to do it without information is technically almost impossible. But we do know that owners offered 150 million originally, and the Suez Canal Authority brought their claim down from 900 million down to 500 and something million. So we know the actual outcome is going to be somewhere between those figures, and that's about as much as we can probably get to.
Yeah, if I could jump in, Gina. I mean, the whole principle about marine salvage is that there has to be an incentive for the salvors, and there has to be an incentive for the property owners as well. So any salvage award is not going to exceed the value of what they save. Otherwise, there's no incentive for an underwriter to instruct a salvor. There's always got to be something for the salvor, something for the underwriter or the property owner. That has to be fair, and usually it gets assessed by an arbitrator based on the amount of expense and the risk. And the Lives Open Forum system in the LSA rules determine what the factors are in determining what the payment should be, and the I think it's a 1989 Nairobi Convention also sets out the criteria for what a salvage award should be. But it's interesting to note that Egypt hasn't ratified that convention, so they're not really bound by these criteria, which is maybe part of the reason why the claim was so outrageous.
The Salvage Award will be in accordance with Article 13 of the Salvage Convention in 1989. The Nairobi one, it relates to the wreck removal, and in that case, we don't have any wreck. So we just look at the, the danger, the expense, the weather, all the parameters which Article 13 takes into account in order to get to a salvage award. That's all. So, but it is something that the first thing we all need to know is just the expense, which we don't know, so we cannot give even an estimate, and we don't care basically. So that's the end of the story, I think.
Okay, yeah, okay. Let's just wrap it up there. And the second question that kind of came in, I'm not quite sure what aspect, but it's quite general. So they wanted some more details on the salvage contract and its importance when it comes to this operation and how the authorities were involved. So I'm not quite sure what exactly the question is, but maybe if you can chip in a few more thoughts on how the salvage contract works, it would be great.
Maybe they are questions regarding the involvement of the SALVAGE on behalf of the Suez Canal authorities. It's not a salvage operator, it's not a salvage operation when there are people who are employed to do this kind of work. Mm-hmm. So in that case, the people are paid under a daily remuneration and not based on the salved value. Maybe the question is why they are claiming for salvage award. I'm not sure about the question, but it is, as we all saw in the beginning, that the part of the 916 million claim, 300 million were in relation to the salvage bonus. So apparently, as we said, it's Egypt. The canal is part of the country since 1956. So it has its local laws, and the local laws apply. So that's why they claimed for salvage, even though they possibly were not allowed to claim salvage because they were just doing their job. I don't know.
Maybe that was a very interesting clarification. Thank you, Iana. Would anybody else like to add something on that final point before we wrap up for today's session? I see no volunteers.
I'll just add a couple of words.
Yeah, of course.
Gina, I think we heard earlier that Smith and Nippon had been appointed, and traditionally, in my experience, they have quite a close working relationship because of the Japanese underwriting market. And whenever a Japanese vessel signs an LOF and Smith are appointed by the owners, you'll find that Nippon Salvage are very close beside them, working hand in hand. Partly because of language difficulties, I think, but in this particular case, I would speculate that Smith and Nippon were working under a Lloyd's Open Forum agreement, and whatever claim the Suez Canal Authority make would be a separate claim against the owners, but that's only speculation.
Yeah, I think at this stage, speculations are as far as we can get, but definitely very, very insightful input from all of you. So unless there's something you would each like to add, I think we've run quite over time, and it was definitely a very interesting and enlightening discussion on salvage operations. we can wrap it up. I would like to sincerely thank everybody on this panel, Stephen Wood of Archimedean Limited, Captain David Sterling of Sterling SALVAGE, Joanna Vida, Pennington's Matching Cooper, Captain Zahir Irani, Constellation Marine Surveyors, Claire Savliris Salvage, of course, and Maria Dragomerli, Helicon Shipping. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining this panel. Of course, my thanks does go out to the Tool Aquarium team who have powered this webinar through their amazing platform and Ocean Stage, and to Lydie and Charlotte, especially for the support. To the Constellation team, of course, for supporting us, also volunteering to support and assist. To all of the supporters of this event, Young Ship Dubai, of course, for putting it together, Savliris Salvage, Oceans Arena, Nimbo Legal, Mubarak Marine, all about shipping. It's all about shipping and Constellation Marine Services. That was it from us at Young Ship Dubai. We definitely will be putting something together again, I believe, to elaborate a bit more on this very interesting topic. And with that, that was it from us. Thank you very much to everybody for participating, joining the webinar, and making it such an interesting discussion. And please do make sure to follow Young Ship Dubai on social media and register as a member. We do put amazing work together, and we're here to empower the new generation of maritime leaders.
And thank you for handling all of us in such immaculate way, Gina. I think you did a fantastic job. It's not easy to control salvage masters and lawyers together, to say the least. Well done.
Thank you very much. You made my job very easy. It was such a pleasant discussion and very enlightening for me.
Thank you.
Good night.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye. Good.
Hello, girls.
Stop the live stream, yeah?
The live stream is stopped. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Good job, Gina.
Oh my God. Thank you so much, ladies.
Very good.
Good job.
I think it went quite well. How many were online? About 40 people.
Yeah. In the platform, and only a couple on 2, 3 persons on Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook always goes really popular in reruns.
Mm-hmm. So I think maybe you have to clip the video, because the 10 first minutes were horrible.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I'll that's why I wanted to record it. I'll reshare it afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, the sound was not good in the beginning.
All right. Thank you so much. We
But
can.
everything else went really good on Facebook and on.
I think so. Thank you. Thank you so much, ladies.
You're welcome. Have a nice day.
You're welcome. I will send the Excel tomorrow. I'm
Okay.
so tired.
Yes, no rush, just to see who it is approximately.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
Perfect. I can send you it now after.
Okay, sure. Thanks so much.
Okay, I'll fix it, Lily.
All right, it's from the 3rd, I think.
Where will you send it, by email?
Oh, but I can just download the online, the people who are online.
Now she wants the complete list of registration.
Okay, perfect. I'll fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.